Hi, I'm Malika Bilal filling in for Fimi OK, and you are in The Stream. Today, Mexico's self-defense militias. Are they protecting citizens from drug cartels or undermining rule of law? Omar Vidar is here looking out for your live feedback. Omar, where does our community seem to fall on this?
You know, we asked them whether these armed groups have the right to actually form, and we got a lot of interesting reactions from people in the community.
I bet.
If you take a look at my screen, Maddie here says, if the law refuses to help those who need it, then taking it into their own hands is necessary. But we also have Promise, who says, no, they don't have any rights to take the law into their own hands while the law enforcement is there. So, of course, the question is law enforcement there and doing its job? For those of you at home, we want you to join the conversation, so be sure to tweet at us using the hashtag AJStream. And
I'm looking forward to hearing those tweets. So, do you have an idea for a future episode of The Stream? We're always open to suggestions, and we look for them on our Facebook page, where I am now. Just go to facebook.com/AJStream, and you'll see the discussion thread where we're asking, what stories are you following today? Let us know, and you could end up in The Stream.
Hi, I'm Domingo Carboni. I'm in Santiago, Chile. I'm a pro-life activist, and I'm on The Stream.
In Mexico, many farmers, business owners, and regular citizens, male and female alike, are taking up arms in a battle against drug cartels. They've said enough is enough, and the combination of continued violence and what's described as poor security by Mexican police and military are fueling the growth of armed citizen groups for self-defense. While crime in many areas has reportedly gone down, critics say some of these groups don't always operate within the law and go too far in enforcing their own versions of justice. So are self-defense groups good for security in Mexico, or are they undermining rule of law? Here to help us discuss this is Grizel Rodriguez. She's the daughter of Nestora Salgado, a community police organizer who's currently in prison in Mexico. We'll hear her mother's story shortly. Via Google Plus in Mexico City, we have Esteban Gonzalez, a blogger and research assistant with the Center for Research and Teaching in Economics. In Mexico City, we have Joan Grillo. He is a journalist and author of the book El Narco, Inside Mexico's Criminal Insurgency. And on the phone, we have Jose Manuel Morales, a general coordinator of a citizens police force in Tepalcatepec in Mexico. Well, Dr. Morales, I want to begin with you, Jose Manuel. You are a medical doctor in Mexico, but you decided to take up arms. What is the threat you're facing that led you to that decision?
Well, I have some 10 or 12 minutes every day, someone by the government, someone by the night employers, but every day I receive more of kind of menace from these people. But it is very important have a person like you trying to help us to promote our freedom, our feelings of liberty. But it's more important that international opinion help us to convince the government to join fighting against the criminals. It's very important for us, your help in this kind. We need, at this time, the international opinion help us to convince our government fighting against the criminals. I will repeat again every day the same sentence. We need a help. It's very urgent, this kind of help, because a lot of people are under attack every day, every night. We all time are, ¿cómo se dice? Enterrando, burning our bodies, but the government is not helping us.
So, Grizel, I want to throw this to you. You heard Jose Manuel saying we need help, and he spoke about the menace. Can you explain what that menace looks like? Now, your mother, who we mentioned at the very top of the show, went back to her hometown to fight that menace. What is that menace?
There was kidnapping, there was torture, there was rape, there was extortion, all these things. There was, at least in my hometown, I'm from Guerrero, it was 2 deaths per month, if not more, extortions, all this. These people barely get by, and the cartels, organized crime would be extortionating them. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
And it came to a point where nobody wanted to walk past a certain hour alone. People would be walking down my hometown with AK-47s, and the municipal police would do nothing. So it really came down to people having to take matters into their own hands.
In terms of people taking matters into their own hands, there's a lot of dispute about what we should call these groups. If you take a look at my screen, Stay Cool Fanzine says, I think that in Mexico they are referred to as community police and self-defense squad. Militia seems to have another meaning. Johan, I want to throw this to you. Do you have a take on what we should call these groups that are emerging?
Yeah, that's a very good and controversial question. As these other people have made the point, this is really a reaction to a situation that's been building up in Mexico for several years. I've been based in Mexico since 2000, documenting the drug-related violence, and we really saw this massive change in recent years, where drug cartels went from simply trafficking drugs to kidnapping and extorting on an enormous scale. And this has had an incredibly brutal, devastating effect on the community. Now, just as the government and the American government and the Mexican government are very confused how to define or call the drug cartel squads. Really, the drug cartels themselves have paramilitary death squads. They're not simply regular criminals we're dealing with. The Knights Templar that Dr. Jose Manuel is referring to have death squads. They use rape as a weapon of terror and a weapon of war. Now, I think it's a difficult and very controversial language to communicate. The idea of community police is something which has been in many indigenous communities in Mexico for many years, going back even centuries. The idea that often indigenous people can police themselves. The idea of a self-defense squad is something more recent. The idea of auto-defense that's appeared more this year, and it's more the idea of guys with ski masks and guns defending their communities. Now, I think militia is a legitimate way to say, because you have got groups of people with guns creating militias to defend their community. So it's really important to try and decide how can we deal with this legally, how can we deal with the situation. If the government is not defending these communities, then how can you create a legal network where people can defend themselves?
Well, Esteban, I want to go to you because you heard what Johan described what these community policing groups are up against, these death squads of drug cartels who are allegedly inflicting violence on the communities there. So I'd like your thoughts on whether or not people are accurate in calling them vigilante justice takers. I mean, is that too harsh? Are these just semantics, or does it matter?
I think it does matter, but I think it doesn't matter that much. For me, as Jan said, I refer to them as communitary police, but they are not all communitary police. There are some other groups that are outside this institutional form, recognized even by some state laws. So I think they are self-defense groups that I wish they were militias, and I wish they were. We could put some more heavy adjectives on that, as vigilantes or something like that. But I'm not sure whether it's an important debate, or whether it may distract people from actually debating the reasons why they are there and why they're getting the guns into their hands and justice into their hands. So yeah, maybe in here in Mexico we call them vigilantes in a despective way, and communitary police or self-defense group in a more likely version of them.
We have a comment here, a question actually from somebody on our Facebook page. Babar Zaman asks, where are these groups getting money from, and who is arming them? Jose Manuel, do you mind taking a stab at that? Who's supporting these groups?
This is the first question everyone asks us, but we start with our own weapons. We start the fighting with our own rifles, 22 pistols. If you came right now and visit one of our little towns to start fighting this night or yesterday, you just going to see little weapons, hunting weapons. Yeah, but if you came again at the same little town in 3 weeks, you will see them with attack rifles, you know, like AK-47 or AR-15. But nobody give us money, nobody give us weapons, just the people. You know, when these guys come to our little town in the middle of the night and coming fighting us, attacking us, if one man of my little town respond with our own guns, they run and give us or let us all the weapons they have, all the cars, even hard cars and radios and ammunition and magazines. That kind of arms, that kind of weapons we have before 7 months fighting with them.
Well, Grizel, you know, before we go too much further in this, we mentioned your mother. Why is your mother in jail? And did she cross a red line?
No. First of all, I'd like to go back onto the issue of the semantics. I can't speak for all Mexico, but I can for Guerrero. There is a law, which is called Law 701, that allows these indigenous communities to form these communitary polices. So they can't be called militia, they can't be called self-defense, they're legal. These formations are legal. At least the one in my hometown, which is Olinala Guerrero, the governor of the state, Guerrero, was praising this formation. He was calling it heroic. So I see it a bit troubling when you call these groups militia, self-defense. That just seems a little more radical to me. It's when you have a law that protects you and allows you to make these formations. It's like calling the police here in Washington self-defense. They're not self-defense because they're legally formed.
No, but in Guerrero and in Chiapas you have legal institutions that can kind of mix these two separate justice approaches. But the thing is that this phenomenon, I mean, Olinala was one of the first ones. I've been following them since December of last year. But there are also many other states in which they don't have these institutional legal figures, and they are taking arms and they are doing kind of exactly the same thing that people in Olinala are doing. So that's what I refer to them as self-defense. But going a bit back to where do they get these resources from, we have also to understand that some of these communities have been around this kind of organizations since 1995. So in Guerrero, in Chiapas, you have some local communities that have a whole infrastructure of managing resources to do whatever they want to do. But there are other parts in which this is completely new, and there has been a couple of detentions made where they have found not just AK-47 but like high caliber guns and SUV transports, and in one spot they also found some drug. So there's also some truth to these concerns about violence and drug cartel money being used in some of these groups, in some, not all, and not
Esteban, I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm glad that you brought up the concerns, because that is something that I'm seeing online. There's a tweet here from Michael. He says, could the guests expand on reports of self-defense groups keeping indigenous people hostage in towns? And that leads us into a video clip that I'd like to play on the subject of enforcing justice. There's this clip showing a self-defense group that's just captured a suspected criminal in the town of Ayutla. Now, this is from journalist Ross McDonald for the Global Mail and SBS Dateline. I'd like you all to have a listen to this.
In Ayutla, the vigilantes have detained an 18-year-old accused of involvement in a sexual assault. Here, the process of justice plays out on the village street.
Porque es sospechoso de secuestro. Ayer secuestraron a una niña de 13 años y iniciamos el operativo y la niña la dejaron ir, pero declaró la muchacha que es el cómplice del secuestro, es hermano del que secuestró a la muchacha.
It may be a case of guilt by association, or he may be guilty as charged. But under vigilante justice, there will be no due process.
La policía comunitaria dicen que tienen evidencias sobre que estabas robando casas.
Yo no.
¿Y qué va a pasar?
So Yoan, you heard what was in the clip. He says there's no due process. Is there a watchdog? Who is to ensure that these aren't just arbitrary arrests that are going on?
Well, first I think Esteban made a very good point that the community police or the different self-defense groups vary massively across the country. From municipality to municipality, state to state, and even within municipalities you have different towns or villages sometimes with different kind of practices. So what is true for some parts of Guerrero, La Tierra Caliente or the Costa Chica can be different, and going to the Michoacán border with Jalisco, you have different practices. In some places you simply have people without guns patrolling a street. In others you have people with AK-47s, grenades, body armor and so forth, and many different things. Most of the time the groups do not if they detain people, in most cases they have been handing them to state authorities. So they will detain an alleged criminal and will give them to state authorities, and that state authorities will then bring in a process or the same as, if they have evidence, we'll put them before a judge and so forth. In some cases, there are community police in Guerrero who have a system of prisons, people inside a group called the CRAC, which brings together various community policing groups. They do have community jails where they can put people for some points in years, and they have a different form of judging there. I wouldn't quite say there's no due process, but there is obviously concerns when you have a growth across the country of these groups. In some places, and I say you cannot tie these all with one brush. I do not want to say this reflects on community police forces and very legitimate community police forces.
Right.
But in some places you have drug cartels posing as community police, posing as self-defense groups, and having some very dangerous practices.
Complicating the issue even more.
We have
Esteban, if I can just throw a question towards you, and then you can combine your answer to that with this as well. We have a question here from our Facebook page. Daniel Garcia asks, why does this vigilante attitude occur in the south of Mexico but not in the north, even though the north is where most of the drug violence is? Can you comment on the geography of this as well?
No, there has been, and they have appeared in north, in several states in north, but they appeared first in the south, and I think that has to do with it goes all the way back to the autonomist movement that Mexico had in the last part of the last century. So as I said, legally in southern Mexico you have groups of people that can organize and can get to do some stuff legally and under the rule of law because of a constitutional amendment that we have. So I think they come up first in south because they have the institutional background, but they're spreading in north states as well. But what I wanted to point out was this question regarding the rule of law, because the question of the show is like fighting are self-defense groups fighting drug cartels, or are they undermining rule of law? And the thing is that everyone knows the situation in Mexico, and with all the power of the rule of law and the war that the state waged against these people that transport narcotics from one place to another, that's not crime for me in any way, but anyway, our rule of law thinks that's crime. We are fighting against them and we are losing the fight, and we are also making some huge mistakes in due process. So it seems to me like a desperate position in which people is saying, yes, but this police community is not going to be able to secure physical integrity nor due process of its citizens. But then again, no one in Mexico can assure that government is doing that. So it's a very difficult debate, because there you cannot talk of a rule of law in most of these places.
And you mentioned that it's a desperate situation. And Grizel, you know, I pulled up on my screen here a petition for your mother, Freedom from Nestora Salgado, American activist in prison in Mexico. Do you and your family feel that you're in a desperate situation? And can you give us an update on your mother's case?
Yes, most definitely we are in a desperate situation. We've tried reaching out to several people here in the United States government, and at this point they're spectators. They haven't done anything to help us. I also wanted to go back onto what Esteban was saying about there's nobody that can guarantee the integrity and the safety of everybody in Mexico. But I'd like to point out that, and again, I can only speak from where I'm from, crime statistics dropped 90% once this community police was formed around the time when I was. After my mom's detention, see what happened was the government that was I don't know how to say it.
It's okay, try your best.
So the government, instead of helping this community police, instead of working together, they were just creating obstacles for them. I mean, if the government from my hometown, Olinala Guerrero, had worked with the community police, something else would have happened, you know? It would be a whole nother story.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about some of those solutions to some of the obstacles that you just mentioned in our post show, but we're going to have to pause this conversation for now. Before that, Omar has a look at some of the stories the stream is following.
You might not think of a population census as anything more than a routine records update, but Bosnia's first census is one of the most politically charged events in over a decade. Yasmin tweets, "A census is being administered for the first time since before the war, and is proving how prevalent ethnic tensions still are." Many fear that the census will disrupt the delicate political balance of Bosnia's ethnic groups, but some people in Bosnia opposed to ethnic politics are trying to diffuse tensions by sharing a simple message: citizens first. With signs like "I am for Bosnia without discrimination" and "Bosnian before anything else," the campaign aims to send a message of unity. Next, we go to the US, where a partial government shutdown is affecting more services than you might have expected. Everything from disease monitoring to some preschool programs will all be suspended during the shutdown. Disappointment also focused on the shutdown of NASA's space program, which lost 97% of their workforce. The freeze put the Mars Curiosity rover into hibernation both on Mars and online. Back on Earth, others lamented the loss of the National Zoo's popular panda live stream, and some are finding creative workarounds during the shutdown, like this stuffed panda, Cam from Time magazine. One suspended worker wondered how long the shutdown jokes would last. Sheila tweets, "Well, I'm officially furloughed. Will lose my sense of humor about the shutdown in 24 hours." What other stories are you following? Tweet them at us using the hashtag AJStream, and they could end up on the show. Malika?
You know, it's interesting. I was trying to pull up a government website yesterday and today and couldn't get to it. And it said this website is not available because of the shutdown.
It's really quite interesting that the most powerful country in the world is having to deal with this sort of stuff where you can't access websites anymore.
And that is a good way to put it. Might be a topic for a future show.
Indeed.
Well, thanks, Omar. On the next AJ Stream, what happens when a young American journalist sits down with Al-Qaeda fighters in Syria? We'll tell you on Thursday what she learned from her conversation with them. But stay with us. The post show on Mexico is next at stream.aljazeera.com. We'll see you online. Welcome back. This is the Stream's online post show. We're talking about Mexico's self-defense militias. Those are the armed citizens groups that are protecting their communities from drug cartel violence. Let's get back to the conversation. Now, before we headed into the post show, we were talking about some of the obstacles that people are facing. What's our community saying?
We actually have a video comment from Sergio, a Mexican living in California, who had this to say. Take a listen.
As a Mexican, I think it's misguided to pit an established corrupt police system versus an untrained self-defense militia. Both are bad choices, like pitting a Big Mac versus a Whopper in a question about nutrition. And knowing Mexico to do something about the security, you're going to have to extricate the established power plants. And is it possible to do that peacefully? I think the answer is no, and thus the insecurity continues.
Yohan, I want to throw this to you. Do you think Mexican communities are stuck between a rock and a hard place, essentially having to choose between either the protection of corrupt police or these groups?
I think many communities are in a very difficult position. I think, as Grisel said, there was a short-term benefit in many communities from these community police forces forming. And I saw that definitely in field work I've done in Guerrero, in Michoacan, where you see in a very short term groups who are going around shaking people down, charging extortion money, were in some ways like a paper tiger. They were quite small, and when you had 100 guys with guns oppose them, or 100 guys, and men and women with guns opposing them, they were quite fast to move away. But I think it's very difficult in the long term. How can this be sustained, and how can you really see this? What's interesting as well is that the government, the Mexican federal government, has had a very confused response to this. It hasn't really known how to deal with it from the beginning, how much to try and support certain groups, how much to oppose certain groups. And more recently, I think the Mexican federal government has been more concerned about groups that it sees as more political. Some groups have also links to certain left-wing political trade unions and so forth, and the government's been more anxious about those groups necessarily than groups with harder links to drug cartels.
Esteban, you heard Yohan mention the government. Now, of course, the president came into office last year. Enrique Peña Nieto, excuse me. He began his term last year. In addition to sending military troops, he's also had kind of a carrots approach. He's trying to increase education and work with the youth. Is this approach working at all?
I mean, it's working for them, and I think it's a smart strategy that since the beginning of these appearances of the groups, Secretary of Government Osorio Chong said like a very political correct answer, like let's see what they're going for, let's see if they want to talk. And I think that has worked out very well, because some of these groups are just taking up arms to make some leverage in their political negotiations. As Jon said, especially in the South, the autonomous indigenous movement and left-wing political parties are very interested in this kind of political leverage. So I mean, it's smart, and it's working for them just to pick on some the ones that they find most dangerous and apply violence on them, and then negotiate with others. But it's working for the government. I'm not sure it's working for the citizens.
Jose Manuel, I have a comment here from Facebook from Carlos, who says essentially that something very similar happened in Colombia, where self-defense militias first appeared and then they became paramilitary units and then eventually infiltrated by drug dealers and corrupt officials. What do you see for the future of the groups that are currently existing in Mexico? Is there a danger of a very similar future actually being impending in Mexico?
Era una entrevista que tú estás mirando todo igual a lo de Colombia, que si crees tú que se va a volver igual a la guerrilla de allá.
I don't think so, because we are clear in our objectives. We just want to exterminate definitively all the crime organized, all the criminals, even the criminals who work by the government. You know, we don't want any person who made robberies, execution, violations, kidnapping. We don't want anybody in this town or in all my region. We doesn't want to fight against the government. We doesn't want to fight against the state. We just need the help of the state and the government, but never we going to combat or fight against the soldiers or against the federal or against the municipal police or the state police. We never fight against them. We just fight against the criminals in every level in which we find them.
Well, Grizel, you know, I want your thoughts because a lot of people online, our community who's watching this show, they're pessimistic. There's a tweet here who says, in my opinion, the self-defense movements are just an effect of the critical situation, but they're not a solution. So your mother is being detained right now. What happens when she is released?
I can't answer that right now because there's so many points to that question that I couldn't possibly answer it. What I do want to point out is if the government, in many occasions, this community police that was formed in my hometown asked for the government's help, the government of the town, and they were denied this help. I'd like to know if the federal government of Mexico used the same determination which they have been using with against the community police and the teacher strikes. If they use that same determination against the narcos, wouldn't things be different? They've gone above and beyond trying to stop these community police and stop the teacher strike, but I've never seen them use that sort of determination against narcos.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that because, of course, none of us is going to call a liar Dr. Mireles, and we all know that the communitarian police from Tepalcatepec maybe has its goals clear and everything, but it has drawn my attention how media and intellectuals are pointing out to the dangers of becoming a Colombia. So, as you said, now government is fighting communitary police because of the threat they represent to future Mexico. And they are diverging or they're distracting resources from the fight with the actual problems of Mexico by creating this future threat. And returning to the commentary about is this the panacea, are communitary police gonna end up the violence in Mexico? I think definitely not, but it's a start, because underlying this whole discussion is the right of an individual to bear arms. I mean, we're in Mexico, we don't have a Second Amendment, and what I'm going to say is completely politically incorrect. But I do think
say it anyway, please.
That a more aware society of their capacity and their right to self-defend is really the first step we need to take towards this violence problem. And it drew my attention a lot when they began to come out on the light, communities like Olinala and the National Commission of Human Rights and human rights activist groups are like, no way, you cannot justify this. The state has a legitimate monopoly of the violence over Mexican territory. It's no good. And I mean, that's just the worst standing position that we can have as a society, especially because the person that hold the monopoly of force are not doing anything to improve our situation. So yeah, I think it's a good start.
I think sometimes this Colombia comparison is a red herring. Colombia has a very different history and very different circumstances. The paramilitary movement in Colombia ended up with some 30,000 armed guys and in a very centralized control who were also trafficking drugs themselves. I think it's very important when the government deals with this to see that the self-defense groups or community police are, in any case, where if you don't agree with them, they're only a symptom and a reaction to the violence and the problems. They're not a cause of this. So the government has to take that into account and see how it can get to the root of this problem. And while it's been incapable of defending citizens against kidnapping, which is such a heinous crime, to defend people against extortion, against rape, it's very hard to take a moral high ground and tell people they cannot defend themselves. But when you really get to the root problems, we still have to look at things like drug trafficking. Why is it that $30 billion every year goes into drug cartels from American consumers to Mexican drug cartels, and they have that money to finance death squads who can terrorize the communities? Why are these groups still able to arm themselves with gun stores in the United States? And why is there a justice system in Mexico which is still dysfunctional after so many years?
Leon, you just asked excellent questions. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, that's all the time we have for now. Just time enough to read 140 characters of a tweet, Omar?
Sure, we actually have one general thought from the community. We have Valor, who basically says, general opinion on this phenomena of these militias, says, these self-defense movements are just an effect of the critical situation, but they are not the solution. So essentially, it's just a temporary phase, perhaps.
That's grim. Well, I want to thank all of our guests for discussing this with us today. Grizel Rodriguez, Esteban Gonzalez, Yoen Grillo, and Jose Manuel Mireles. On Thursday's show, what happens when a young American journalist sits down with Al-Qaeda fighters in Syria? We'll tell you on Thursday what she learned from her conversation with them. And until then, we'll see you online.